All right, welcome everyone to the DoD SBIR STTR Ask Me Anything panel. I'm Kaitie Penry. I'm with the National Security Innovation Network, and I'll give you just a quick background on the National Security Innovation Network. So National Security Innovation Network is a program office under the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. We have been around since about 2016. And NSIN partners with research universities and the venture community to bring innovative tools and solutions to warfighters. Really what we want to do is make sure that we are coming out to non-traditional people, innovators who can bring solutions and making sure they get connected to the right units that are out there. Our headquarters is in Washington, DC. We have 11 regional offices, and then there's 9 university program directors that are situated at top tier universities across the US. So I personally am situated at UC Berkeley. Overall, we are working to kind of just bring about more collaboration between academia and early stage venture with national security. We are made up of 3 portfolios: national service, collaboration, and acceleration. I think for the purposes of this, you guys are mainly focused on our acceleration portfolio. That's really how do we work and promote dual use ventures. So overall, NSIN is helping to build a more innovative DoD. We deliver a number of programs that look for new tools and methods to bring to the Department of Defense. As I said before, we collaborate with major research universities, and we work with the venture community. Just going forward, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. You can reach me at kpenry@nsin.us. So one of the things we want to make sure that we're doing is to kind of make sure that startups coming out of the Cal ecosystem or startups that want to work with the Cal ecosystem are knowledgeable about the DoD, SBIR, and STTR process, and that you feel comfortable applying to STTRs and SBIRs. So applying to these SBIRs and STTRs may open other doors down the road as well. For example, NSIN is hosting a pitch day with the US Space Force in January. The participants in the pitch day will be chosen from the 20.3 SBIR Phase 1 awardees, which is the current cycle that's open. Winners of the competition will get a signed MOU for Phase 2 SBIR. So from here, I'll pass it over to my co-host, Laura Hassner, who's from Berkeley's Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship.
Thanks, Kaitie. Welcome, everyone. I hope that wherever you are, this finds you safe and able to breathe somewhat decent quality air these days. My name is Laura Hassner, and I am the Strategic Advisor to UC Berkeley's Chief Innovation and Entrepreneurship Officer. One of the goals of our office is to ensure that all of our entrepreneurs and our stakeholders are aware of the wide variety of resources that are available to you at UC Berkeley. We have so many that we couldn't actually fit them all on a single slide. But just briefly, here are some of the more structural programs that are available at UC Berkeley. And assuming that my slides will permit me, I'd like to also share with you student groups and alumni groups that we have that support endeavors on campus, and 2 websites that might be worth bookmarking for you to learn more. The first, the Berkeley Gateway to Innovation, and the second, the IPRA website, both of which help you to explore the vast variety of innovation and entrepreneurship resources that we have here at UC Berkeley today. We will ask you to please contribute your questions into the chat box at any point. We'll save time at the end of our panelists' presentations to be able to go through the questions and make sure that you all receive your answers. It's my pleasure now to introduce some of our panelists, beginning with my colleague, Kate Lewis. Kate is the Associate Director in Berkeley's Industry Alliance Office and has been at UC Berkeley for over 15 years. She helps to facilitate collaboration and research between industry and UC Berkeley and negotiates a variety of industry-sponsored contracts for research across campus. Prior to joining the IAO, Kate worked in the Sponsored Projects Office of UC Berkeley and brings many years of experience with state and federal government and nonprofit contracts and grants. Next, I'll introduce my colleague, Mike Cohen. Mike is Director of Innovation Ecosystem Development for the Office of Technology Licensing. Mike works in UC Berkeley's Office of Intellectual Property and Industry Research Alliance, IPRA, the website I showed you briefly earlier, where he has a variety of roles. Mike does full stack IP management from patenting to licensing across infotech, biotech, and clean tech. He also develops Berkeley's innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem. And in that capacity, Mike works with accelerators like Skydeck and manages programs like the Shared Special User Facilities, or SUFIs as we call them on campus, which several Cal startups have used as a part of the SBIR STTR funding. Kaitie, could you help me by introducing the rest of the panelists, please?
Yes, of course. And also just to let everyone know, we are recording this so that it can be posted afterwards, and all participants will be able to pull it up as they need to. So next we'll have Dr. Joanne Lo. Dr. Lo is the CEO of Elysian Labs. She's also a CITRIS Foundry and Berkeley Skydeck alum. She's a SBIR awardee, and she also is currently applied to an STTR. She'll be able to kind of talk about the ins and outs of what it was like applying for a DoD SBIR and kind of those doors that it's open for. We also have Scott Aughenbaugh. Scott is the NSIN Acceleration Portfolio Director, which means he knows everything about everything with how we work with early stage ventures. He's also a SBIR and STTR SME. And last on our panel will be Major Jared Evans. Major Evans is the current AFWERX STTR Open Topic Program Manager. He's also had experience working with the Air Force Ventures Program. So from here, each panelist will talk for about 5 to 10 minutes on some high-hitting topics that hopefully start to spark some questions. As Laura mentioned, please feel free to answer or to put your questions into the Q&A box as we go along, and we'll ask them of the panelists afterwards. So Scott, I'm passing it over to you.
Thank you, Kaitie. Really appreciate the introductions, and I'm really excited to be here. This is actually one of my favorite topics to discuss, because I think there's a bunch of opportunities for early stage ventures to participate and help out in many cases the government. So the thing that I would say at the beginning of this is, for those of you that are not familiar with things like SBIR and STTR, it's been around government since the early 80s. I think 1982 is when it started, and has spread throughout a number of agencies that issue SBIR contracts. And STTR contracts. And so something to keep in mind when somebody says SBIR and STTR, that it's more than just the Defense Department, where I happen to reside and spend my days, but all sorts of other government agencies that have access to them. So something to keep in mind is, if you haven't been there to the website, the SBIR website for government, you should go take a look at it. It's certainly a great place for useful information and some of the information that I'll cover, but something that you should all look at. The first thing I would say after that is the Defense Department and SBIR. So Small Business Innovation Research, and I'll let Jared speak to STTR, because he's certainly more of an STTR guru than I am. But in terms of SBIR, what is it? Well, they're usually contracts. They usually come in multiple phases. There are requirements in that contract process. So imagine that there's a phase 1 at a certain dollar amount, and a phase 2 that's usually at a slightly larger dollar amount. And from there, usually we talk about phase 3 opportunities that are usually above and beyond. A phase 1 contract usually has a smaller period of performance, usually defined as somewhere between 3 and 9 months. And then usually phase 2s are longer, starting at usually about a year long, going up to like 27 months. But that's all the information that you'll find when you're proposing against that particular topic. And so it's really key and crucial when you're looking at SBIR topics to look at what those terms are, because I think that'll set that pathway for the conversation. There are some very popular varieties of SBIR contracts right now. So the Air Force does a lot of work in SBIR contracts. They tend to do shorter contracts for phase 1s. They're usually 3 months with a $50,000 contract ceiling for that phase 1, really focused on customer discovery, whereas the Army and Navy have different varieties as well of those phase 1 SBIR contracts that they issue. Something to also keep in mind is it's not just the big services, right? So we're talking about Air Force, Army, and Navy, but there are a number of other organizations that have and do execute SBIRs inside of the Defense Department. Those include ChemBio, DARPA does some work on SBIRs, Defense Health Agency, Defense Logistics Agency, Defense Microelectronic Activity, Defense Threat Reduction Agency, Missile Defense Agency, NGA, National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, and SOCOM, Special Operations Command. All have access to SBIR, including also there's an OSD office for SBIR sitters. So there's a bunch of groups that do work in SBIR sitter. It just happens that the three big services do the most work based on the sheer dollar amounts that they have access to and they focus on in this space. So something to keep in mind, when we're talking about SBIR sitter, there's lots of groups in the Defense Department that are participating. So a lot of work here in terms of helping to not only stimulate the economy where others have interest in, but also encourage innovation and new sources of R&D, non-dilutive, lots of great buzzwords that you can throw around when you're thinking about SBIR sitter. But what gets me really excited is thinking about the audiences that can participate. So for me, I'm looking at oftentimes early stage ventures, groups that have started the process of company formation, which is a requirement for SBIR sitter. You need to be a company. Those companies have to do a number of necessary steps as well when they're applying. So think beyond incorporating, you need to have a DUNS number, so Data Universal Numbering System. There's a website that you can go to get that. You have to be registered in the system for award management. You need a cage code. You need to register on the SBIR website. I think those are most of the sort of big steps, but what I would say at the beginning is being a company is really that sort of first hurdle. Next hurdle after that is making sure that you go through that registration process for those sites. And that could take, I would plan on a month for those activities just to make sure that you budget enough time. So again, if you haven't started on that activity before today, you should certainly think about today as that starting pistol for you if you're going to participate in this cycle to start filling out and getting down that information so you can submit your proposals. So again, looking at those topics, you get the requirements for each individual topic, what you got to do. It's a little bit different from service to service. And then there's specific requirements that the government has for what you'll need to put in almost every single proposal. And I would start with those as sort of the building blocks. From there, again, because based on the topic, it'll determine what information you submit. Is it something like the Air Force request, which is a 5-page white paper and a 15-slide deck? Is it something along the lines of a 20-page white paper? And then you can start planning better and more accordingly based on that. You probably have questions about how do they get scored as SBIR and sitter. I've actually done evaluations for a number of SBIR sitter proposals in the past. There's lots of different ways that you can assign points, but really start thinking about how major building blocks to start thinking about in your proposals. Like, what does the technical specs look like for this proposal as it's coming in? How would somebody look at and rate the technical feasibility of this particular proposal? What does it look like from the team perspective? Do you have the right team in place to execute a phase 1 and hopefully a phase 2 SBIR sitter proposal? And the third key area that is always worth looking at is, obviously SBIR sitter is really focused on creating that R&D pathway, but what does your commercialization pathway look like as you start thinking about future steps? So delivering on that phase 1, thinking about that phase 2, really that prototyping stage for many SBIR sitter contracts. So again, I think it differs based on what the contract is, what the proposal is really communicating on behalf of the service, but really thinking about what does that commercialization prospect look like for that product that you're hoping to build in the future, if not built already. So thinking about those sort of big pieces at the beginning, it's great that if you're a company. If you're not a company, you should certainly start in that process. You should certainly start registering with the noted federal pieces of information that you need to get. So start that process now if you haven't started so already. And then really start thinking about your pathway for your proposal. Like, what are the key items that you need to include to make sure that you can communicate and help that person who's going to evaluate your SBIR sitter proposal on the other side make a good determination about whether you're the right fit for that particular topic. So I would just say that that's at a big high level SBIR, STTR, sort of the building blocks process. The one thing I would say specifically to STTR, and which is why I'm glad that Kaitie and Berkeley put together this conversation with these great panelists, is that for STTR, who completes the work is really, really key and crucial. Again, I know that a lot of these requirements are up on the SBIR site and CITRIS site, but it's about a company that's located in the United States. It needs to have a participating institution, a nonprofit college, university, a research organization, an FFRDC. That small business awardee has to have an intellectual property agreement in place, and also that the STTR requires that the small business perform at least 40% of the R&D, and the partnering research institution perform at least 30% of the R&D. And I'm sure that there's a way to refine that a bit, and certainly Jared has a lot more knowledge of STTR. But again, at a very high level, those are the things to think about, and the differences between SBIR and CITR are really that research institution affiliation, which is oftentimes very hard for that small business to find. It's on the SBIR side, it's pretty straightforward in terms of applying, but the CITR side has a little bit more work that's required to make sure there's that matchup with the research institution. And so, again, really excited that this conversation was put together. But again, just want to provide some opening comments, high level SBIR, CITR. And again, if there's something that's missing, I'm happy to answer it in the comments, but I want to make sure to get it off to these great panelists as well, because I'm sure they have other places they can build on and add to, or hopefully you're correct if I've said anything incorrect so far in this conversation.
Great, Scott, thanks. Next, we'll go over to Jared to kind of touch more on why AFWERX uses SBIR, STTR, and what kind of the open topic application looks like.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I appreciate the time this afternoon to talk to everyone. And as Scott mentioned, the SBIR and STTR programs are federal government wide. And so my comments will be couched very specifically to the Air Force application of those programs. So just keep that in mind as we go through that. What I'm talking about is specific to the Air Force and how we implement the programs for our customer base. And so first of all, the Air Force does things a little bit differently, and in some cases a lot differently, as Scott kind of alluded to here. You know, ultimately the Air Force is transitioning from a requirement-based type of solicitation to what we call an open topic. And what that really means is that any small business that's eligible, that meets the criteria that Scott mentioned earlier, can put in a proposal and receive a government contract. It's not specific to a certain tech space. They don't have to be applicable to a certain need statement or requirement from the government. It's open to any small business within any tech space. They can come in to their phase one, which, as Scott mentioned, is 3 months and $50K, and ultimately receive a government contract to find their demand signal inside of the government and the defense marketplace. You know, over time, the government has led R&D. You know, especially when you think back to the space race in the 50s and the 60s. There's a lot in the federal space and in terms of investment, and you know, the total market that the government was taking up in terms of R&D was significant, right? And as we move forward through the decades, the federal government specifically, has made up less and less of the larger R&D investment across the U.S. And so, you know, the government has been slow to change, generally speaking, in response to that change over time. But we, you know, with this AFWERX and Air Force Ventures process, we want to really not only grow the defense industrial base, but really leverage the commercial market, just generally speaking, and commercial technology in the government space, right? So not only does that represent a strategic advantage, right, from a national security point of view, but it also it's more efficient, right? In very simple terms, it's much more efficient in terms of taxpayer dollars, right? So historically, the government has paid $1 out of every dollar of R&D, right? We've paid for it just completely out of pocket. We haven't leveraged any efficiencies at scale. We haven't leveraged, you know, external funding. And so through this AFWERX and Air Force Ventures processes, through this open topic, we're really trying to bring external investment and incentivize others to show that they care, simply put, about a specific technology or solution, and pile on not only inside of the government, but also external to the government as well. So as we mentioned, phase one for the open topic, SBIR and STTR topics, 3 months and 50K, and they move into a phase two, which is 15 months and 750K. In phase one, you find some of those early adopters, right? We through the program and through receiving that government contract, we give you the legal basis to have much more substantive conversations that you would be able to have otherwise. And by leveraging the process and the tools that are given in phase one, you're able to find those stakeholders inside of the Air Force, right? Which, by the way, doesn't include just the United States Air Force anymore, is now Space Force as well. So when we talk about the Air Force, I'm talking about the new department of the Air Force. So that's an important clarification to make as well. But in phase one, you're going to find that product market fit. You're going to find your early adopters. You're going to find people in short, who care about what you're doing. And we're going to codify that relationship and move into phase two, where you're developing a prototype, proof of concept type of application for those defense stakeholders, right? And over time, we're going to move through that phase two program, and we're going to continue to diversify that customer market. We're going to continue to diversify that community that's building around your product and your solution, right? And ultimately, we're going to move into one of two different things, right? So phase two historically is where a lot of things just kind of went to die, right? That was, there wasn't a whole lot of follow-on and transition from the program. So from the AFWERX phase two, well, you have two different options. One, the first is what we call our STRAT-FI. STRAT-FI stands for the Strategic Funding Increase, and it represents a very steep opportunity curve in terms of funding. So, historically, in terms of government acquisitions, the small business space, really, which is where these programs live, is really small, right, relative to the other acquisition programs that are going on. They're short in duration, they're small in dollar value, right? And ultimately, it limited the amount of effects that these small businesses could have, not only on our defense marketplace, but on our mission set as a whole, right? And so the STRAT-FI program is one really significant way to combat that. So we moved from a phase one, which is 50K, phase two, 750K. And with the STRAT-FI program, we're able to have contract values and effort values up to $60 million, right? Which is way more than what was generally permitted through the program. And that's through a process that we've developed in conjunction with SBA and Air Force leadership to enable these small businesses who are developing technology for us to really grow and scale, more importantly, to the needs of their continuing to, increasingly diversified customer base inside the defense market. So while in phase two in the STRAT-FI, you need to have an Air Force lead point of contact, an Air Force lead customer. The contract mechanisms that we employ allow other services, allow other federal agencies, allow other customers to come and find you, and all collectively to work together. And ultimately, like I said, the STRAT-FI is effort values up to $60 million and over 4 years. And that duration is important, right, in government terms, because not only does that increase and kind of allow you to scale your solution for your defense market, but it also allows you to get into the budget cycle for those organizations, right? Because the federal budget cycle is 3, 4, 5 years long, right? And so those organizations need to be able to budget for you long term, and so that we can get that annual recurring revenue, we can get that sustainable defense customer established, right? And so that's really where you see these programs come into play. And then the other option coming out of phase two, not only is the STRAT-FI, but is a phase three. Phase three, the term phase three makes it sound like phase one and phase two, when in reality, it really is a separate animal. There's no limit in terms of duration. There's no limit in terms of funding, how much it can be utilized. And it is a sole source procurement or development effort that is funded completely by your customer. The sole source is a really important piece of this. And the government folks, if there are any government folks on the line, they can attest to the fact that it's probably most helpful for us, because usually what happens if I was, in my regular job in the Air Force and say, hey, I want to be able to use this piece of equipment, right? We want to procure this thing. It would take me 6 to 12 months, if not more or longer, to get that in my hand and to be able to use it, right? There's competitive contracting laws. We have to interface. We have to develop requirement documents. There's a whole ton of things that we have to do. Now, with the sole source justification and approval, what it allows us to do is, as an Air Force user, to go straight to you, right? It gives me the statutory authority to go straight to you and to your business and buy this product, right? And that's not only something that's applicable to the Department of the Air Force, but that is across the federal government. So, if you're working and work through this open topic, or any of the other topics, frankly, any SBIR or STTR has this baked in, you can receive your phase 1 and immediately move to a phase 3 if it made sense, right? There's a lot of flexibility built into that phase 3 contract. As always, you can put more questions in the chat. I want to make sure we leave time for our other panelists here, but I really appreciate the opportunity and look forward to working with you. The one last thing I'll part with is that there's an Ask Me Anything webinar coming up on the 18th of September. You can look on the events page as part of the AFWERX webpage and look and find more information. We have a current solicitation out and proposals are due on the 22nd of October. So with that, I appreciate everyone's time and looking forward to your comments and questions. Thanks.
Hey, thanks, Jared. And also feel free if you want to drop the link for your event in the chat box as well. Next, we have Kate Lewis. Kate Lewis is from Berkeley's Intellectual Property and Industry Research Alliances offices. She'll talk kind of about how IPRA works with the SBIR STTR process.
Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to be here today. I have a few slides just to go through so we can go ahead and get started. So as Kaitie said, I work in under the IPRA office, the Intellectual Property and Industry Research Alliances. And I'll talk a little bit about the 2 offices under that, and then I'll talk about some of the ways we interact with startups and how we can partner with startups who are, or small businesses who are applying to the SBIR and STTR programs. And I just want to mention also that Mike Cohen, our next speaker, and I work in 2 different branches, 2 different offices under the Intellectual Property and Industry Research Alliances office. Each of our offices supports SBIR and STTRs in different ways. And we both support IPRA's innovation and entrepreneurship activities as well. So the Industry Alliances Office facilitates relationships between industry and our faculty, both for direct industry-sponsored research, as well as for Berkeley's participation in SBIR and STTRs. We also help to bring in research materials like cell lines and plasmids that can be used in our research, data, software, any other materials that can come in for use in our research. And our licensing office performs intellectual property management, including patenting and licensing, and manages outgoing agreements to transfer Berkeley's intellectual property, like research materials data, to external partners. So if a Berkeley researcher is interested in participating in a small business SBIR or STTR proposal, my office, the Industry Alliances Office, will help to support their participation. We'll review the Berkeley Statement of Work, we'll review our budget, and provide our boilerplate documents. We also provide letters of commitment and support any updates to for whatever the small business needs in order to be able to submit their final proposal on time. Oftentimes, and this is specifically for STTRs, but sometimes for SBIRs as well, and as Scott mentioned as well, there's an IP agreement that's required between the small business and the research partner and the nonprofit research institution. My office also will help to provide that agreement, and over the years we've developed a template. We have that, we call it the allocation of rights agreement, and it addresses intellectual property disposition during the term of that resulting agreement. And we'll work with the small business often, as quickly as they need on an accelerated timeline to ensure that all of their requirements are met so that they can be competitive for that award as well. So once that agreement is funded, we also will help to draft the subcontract, and we'll work with the small business to address any outstanding issues. If the small business has a template that they like to use, we can also respond to that, but we are happy to help provide a template to start, which is, we find often really, really helpful for our small business partners. And we're gladly we gladly share our templates, and we hope to help expedite that negotiation process. Small businesses also often don't have a lot of experience working with FAR clauses under federal contracts. So we'll help them to determine which FAR clauses they need to flow down from their prime awards that are appropriate for universities. And that often is a skill that takes time to learn, and so we're happy to provide that additional assistance. Because Berkeley is an institution of higher ed, or a university, we have a number of policies and principles that dictate how we submit proposals, what our subcontract process looks like. We're a large organization. We have, I guess our mantra now is doing more with less. We have staff with really high caseloads. So we require enough time to put together, review, and submit our portion of the proposal. Usually that takes at least 2 weeks. It could take more. And faculty often have internal departmental deadlines as well that they're dealing with. And so if you're wanting to work with one of our professors or researchers, we strongly encourage you to start as early as possible because they have deadlines that they need to meet. And if you engage with them too late, often they can't participate, they're not able to. And in some cases, they're not going to be willing to, because that would require exceptions to our policy to be able to submit those proposals late. Importantly, in addition, Berkeley is subject to the fundamental research exemption. And so what that means is that we expect all of our results, all of the research that we're doing from our participation, Berkeley's portion of this research project, will be widely published and shared broadly within the research community, within the scientific community. It also means that we do not discriminate on the basis of citizenship or nationality. And we also can't accept classified restricted projects or projects with citizenship restrictions or publication restrictions. So that sometimes can pose problems because a lot of the FAR clauses that a company may accept, especially if it's for dual use, would or may have citizenship restrictions or publication restrictions. And so we work with our small businesses. If they are performing research that is subject to citizenship or publication restrictions, we will work with them to carve out specifically what Berkeley is doing. So Berkeley does not need to participate in the entire project. They don't need to participate in the portions of the project that have those restrictions, because those are things that we wouldn't be able to accept. But we can carve out the portion of the research that Berkeley's doing as basic or applied fundamental research. Oftentimes, if a company does need to accept publication or citizenship restrictions, we'll also need a determination letter from the sponsoring agency, Air Force or other DoD agency. And so we're asking, when working with our campus, if you're submitting a proposal for a project and you're expecting these types of terms or restrictions, or you get a contract and you're starting to review it, it's extremely important to talk to us early and talk to your program officer early so that we can try to get everything that we need in order so we don't cause delays. As we heard before, some of these phase 1 agreements may only be 3 months, maybe 9 months. We don't want to have to spend 3 months trying to negotiate the subcontract and trying to get all the paperwork in order that we need. So we're really, the earlier we can work together on these issues, we're here to help and help get these things moving forward. We also don't want to accept or create technology or data that is subject to export control laws for the exact same reason. We're a university, we value open academic freedom, and so we have difficulty accepting anything or doing anything that would be subject to export control laws, because that inherently would cause issues with citizenship and publication. So if your project requires you to disclose export controlled information or data to us, then we need to carefully review that request, work with our export control officer, work with our faculty, our PI here, principal investigator here at Berkeley. And if we're able to accept that for that particular project, we need to put in place a technology management plan so that we can work together and ensure that that information can be kept safely. We also find that a lot of times it's our faculty and researchers, postdocs, graduate students who are starting businesses or who are working with Berkeley affiliated businesses, and inherently there may be conflict of interest issues. So if it's a Berkeley faculty-led startup and they want to partner back with their lab on campus, then we can run into some issues. But we do have processes to address those issues. And I can say that as a university, we are dedicated to finding a way to manage those conflicts of interest in a way that works within our policies and practices. And again, it's helpful for us to get information early so that we can address those issues early. And we don't want to run into delays down the road. Again, some of these phase 1s are 3 to 9 months. We don't want to run into issues with not having those approvals in place. And then, as Laura mentioned in the introduction, we can also help to connect small businesses with Berkeley faculty or researchers through the begin.berkeley.edu website. So definitely bookmark that website. In addition, we can also work with small businesses to provide resources, to provide referrals to different programs and services for additional help or guidance on their proposals. We work with a number of different SBA agencies and other entities that can help to support you, and we're happy to provide those referrals based on what you need. So with that, I'll hand it back to Laura.
Thank you so much, Kate. That was a fantastic overview. And as you closed out, I just want to underscore the concierge feature on the begin.berkeley.edu website. It's just a really fabulous way for you to get individual personalized attention for the questions that you might have. Now, it's my pleasure to pass the floor over to my colleague, Mike Cohen, who is the Director of Innovation Ecosystem Development at the Office of Technology Licensing. And we've asked Mike today to cover licensing university inventions and the shared special user facilities. Mike, I welcome you to take the floor. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. Can you hear me and see my screen? Great.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to focus my brief overview on one particular area that I think is of interest to a lot of startups and companies pursuing SBIR and STTRs, and that is, it's common for these startups in their applications to propose using a portion of their grant funding to do research at UC Berkeley. And as Scott mentioned, it's even required as part of the STTR application. So I'm going to show you a simple chart that we recently created to figure out how to navigate R&D activity at UC Berkeley. And this, by the way, is somewhat applicable to other US research universities. So first, I'm going to start up here in the upper left-hand corner, and I'm going to focus on, first thing you want to think about is what kind of, where is the location of in which you want to conduct your R&D activity. The first question is it a core user facility? And at UC Berkeley and other research universities, we have some facilities that were designed from the ground up to be used for both academic and industry use. And there are set rates to pay for the kind of facilities. And if you are using a core user facility, which by the way, you can see a whole list of them at UC Berkeley from this link right here, then you just basically complete a simple facilities use agreement with that core user facility. And then we have this office called Berkeley Contracts and Property Protection that will execute that agreement. If you're not using a core user facility, then are you using a lab that is managed by a faculty principal investigator, or PI? And if not, then you must be doing something pretty special that we don't, it's kind of anomalous, so you should just contact our office to discuss what you're doing. If you are using a faculty's lab, then the next question is, what kind of activity are you conducting there? Is it company funding of university research? That would be, say, a subcontract as part of an STTR. And if that's the case, then as Kate mentioned, you can do a sponsored research agreement with our office, and here's the link for you to get started there. If you're not doing company-funded university research, then maybe the next thing to consider, are you doing, is the company doing just commercial R&D for its own sake using our facilities? And recently we enabled that to happen. It's kind of unique to allow a for-profit commercial company to conduct commercial R&D in a professor's lab in a nonprofit university, but we now have a mechanism for that. It's called the SUFI agreement. It's a shared special user facility for innovation entrepreneurship. And it's kind of modeled after the core user facility agreement, but it has some other, some oversight restrictions. And there again, you can go to this link if you're interested in pursuing that. If you aren't doing university funded research or commercial R&D, then the next question is, are you doing something that would use our facilities to generate revenue for the company? And we just have to say right there that that just is not allowable, just doesn't make sense for the nonprofit university's facilities to be used for revenue generation for a for-profit company. But if you're doing yet something else, again, that's kind of off the chart here, then just contact our office and we can work with you to figure out what to do. And an example of this kind of anomalous activities, we have a robotics company that's part of Skydeck that wants to use their robots which clean. They can, for example, clean a bathroom or a classroom, and they want to test it in one of our academic buildings. So that's not really on this chart, but it would be nice for the university to be able to to test this and then be a pilot customer for this company, because with a lot of startups, credibility in the market is important, and when you have customers, they get other customers. So we try to figure out a way to allow this robotics company to use those classrooms to test their robot cleaning capabilities. And the way we're probably going to do that is through a special facilities use agreement. So these anomalous conditions are possible, but you actually have to work with us to figure out the right way to approach that. And that's my summary of how to navigate R&D facilities at UC Berkeley, especially in conjunction with SBIR and STTR opportunities. So Laura, I'll send it back to you.
Thanks, Mike. I dropped the links that you were speaking about in the chat as well, so they're there for our panelists reference. It's now my pleasure to welcome Dr. Joanne Lo to the floor. Dr. Lo is the CEO of Elysian Labs, and we are proud to call her an alum of both the CITRIS Foundry and the Skydeck programs here on campus. She's also an SBIR awardee, and we look forward to hearing about your experience. Dr. Lo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Laura. So I don't have slides, so I'm gonna make a short little introduction about what I do, short experience about how we went through SBIR and STTR, and I would just love to hear from you guys in terms of any questions that you have. So my PhD is from UC Berkeley, electrical engineering. My undergrad was from UC Davis, so I'm very much in the UC ecosystem. And when I first came out from completing my PhD, I started NSF I-Corps. And for those who have gone through I-Corps is another NSF program that allows you to work with users from the ground up to validate your idea one way or another, to understand how to create a product from the ground up from users' requirements, basically. So that's kind of my background. My education is very much University of California bred, and my ideology of engineering product development for companies very much I-Corps influenced, which is from the ground up, from user standpoint. And then I have my company for 4 years now, gone through Skydeck and CITRIS. And I actually did a lot of different ways of government contracting and selling products that way, and different types of government contracts, so product and labor contracts, before I went to SBIR. And that started maybe 1 or 2 years ago. And I've recently just started at STTR. So that's kind of my background. And what I'm trying to say is that I know that there are many different ways to get engaged with the government. And in my opinion, SBIR might be the easiest way out there to get engaged with the government, get access to users, and so on and so forth. And like Jared was saying, the sole source agreement or the sole source contract is actually something that is really, really valuable that a lot of people might not even fully understand until they get there. So it's just, trust me when I say it's just like a fantastic way of getting engaged with the government. In my opinion, again, this is kind of from the experience of working with the government without SBIR for a couple of years and working with the commercial space for a couple of years. The SBIR, the value of that comes from you are getting paid to expand your customer base. Second, you get paid to develop your product without any dilution. And you are getting access to a group of users that are just there to talk to you. And that is something that you can't, or those 3 things are something that you can't really get outside of SBIR. You can't really get that in the commercial realm, talking to VCs. I mean, if you're a startup company and you want to get 150K on a virtual concept, right, you are going to dilute a lot. you are not going to have people to pay for your development and user discovery at the same time. So SBIR in concept is just a really great opportunities for startups to get off the ground and get running and develop a really solid, good products. So like I said, I did SBIR mostly and STTR recently. So from a small company perspective, the applications for both is actually very similar to what you would put in a VC deck. So things that you would put in a VC deck are, very succinct summary of what your product is, the benefits that it brings to the users, and the market potential for all those things, right? So all those things that you have prepared for a VC deck, you just make it into an Air Force focus thing, and then you put it into SBIR deck. Not saying that you just kind of shove everything in there, because it does require some modification, but if you have done a VC deck, you should not be confused about things that they ask you. There are paperwork things that you need to do, but again, that's just sit there with like food and just snacks for an afternoon and just get those done. It's not a big deal. So if you have any concerns at all about you not understanding the government and hesitant in applying for a phase 1, and I would say don't, because phase 1, in my opinion, is very much, you have to make a concerted effort. You have to make a good attempt to understand the Air Force needs. You read the documents that they publish. That's another thing. The government actually published a lot of documents for you to read to understand their needs, and most people don't read them and then complain the government doesn't say anything. But the Air Force does a really good job publishing all the investment area, focus areas, and read those, understand how potentially your products can be applied to the Air Force needs. And then just get those slides done. It's really not that difficult. And then when you do a phase 1, if you do get accepted for a phase 1, you will get an opportunity to talk to users to understand their needs even better. So if you have any hesitation of, oh, I don't know anything about the government, that's what a phase 1 is good for, is, you show a genuine attempt to understand their needs, and you get an opportunity to get paid to actually make it even better. So that's all I really have planned to say, and I see some questions popping up. I can answer them or just answer them later, but yeah.
Great, thanks, Joanne. We do have some questions popping up. Just a reminder, if you do have a question, go ahead and throw them into the Q&A box at the bottom. So the first question, Scott and Jared, this is probably for you guys. What is the best way to get feedback on a phase 2 proposal from NSIN, program officers, or others in advance of submission?
So I'll go ahead and I'll jump in just really quickly. Ultimately, the Air Force does not review proposals beforehand, right? So this is maybe, there's an opportunity for others to do so. But I'll actually just kind of vocalize one of the answers I gave in the Q&A here just recently, in terms of, what do you want to do? How do you up your chances of being selected? And the short answer is do the simple things, right? Read the solicitation, like we mentioned just a moment ago. Complete your registrations. Make sure that you're eligible. In the solicitation document itself, there are evaluation criteria. That is what your proposal is evaluated against, right? So speak directly to them in plain language, right? These are normal folks you're speaking to who may not necessarily know all acronyms in your market and all the details associated with your ecosystem, right? So those are that will put you in a position to be successful, right? There are some kind of non-negotiables. If you're not registered in the system, we can't award you a contract, right? We can love you to death, but we can't do anything for you at that point. We try to be very, very explicit, sometimes to a fault, in terms of what we're looking for. And try to do your best and speak to that succinctly, right? And in very plain language, and you'll be in a position for success. Over.
I would love to build off of what Jared said, because it was a really great set of points on, yeah, we won't be looking at your proposal to help you write a better proposal. That's not a thing that we can do on the government side to help you win a contract. But one of the things I would highly recommend you to do is to think about your customer a bit. One of the things that I've seen on the proposal side is sort of companies arriving at, I'm going to write a proposal and then do the thing and then figure out who my customer is. The reality is, even in a phase 1 3-month contract, there really isn't a lot of time to figure out who your customer is going to be for a phase 2. So I would say that one of the best ways to prepare for success in phase 2, and even before you submit your phase 1, is to start learning more about the Defense Department and the potential list of customers that you could address with your product. Heading into your proposal with a strong understanding of who you could be selling to, I actually think makes a really compelling case when somebody's reading your proposal. Hey, like, this company has actually really thought a lot about who would potentially use the product, more so than maybe other applicants. And so I would say that that's a clear thing that I see. I mean, it's not a requirement steadfast, but I would say that, like, if you want to impress somebody, show them that you understand their market, right? It's the same thing that you would do on the business side if you were selling to another distributor or another company your product. So think about your customer a bit more when you're filling out your proposal. Start thinking about what agencies would potentially buy, and then maybe start thinking about end users and others that you maybe have talked to on the Defense Department side, if you've already talked to them. And that's really where, again, we've got a really great resource for you in the Cal system with Kaitie. Kaitie is there, right? She understands a lot more about the Defense Department and those that are helping out there in California. And we just have so many ways to find those interactions before you submit your proposal. So I would highly recommend spending some more time thinking a bit more about your customer heading into the proposal cycle. I think that's the easiest way for you to improve your chances on a phase 1 or a phase 2 proposal.
I can add something to that. So there are 2 ways that we do to improve our proposal. One is, when we first started, we actually hired consultants, people who really, really know what they're talking about, and they're paid to help you out. That, you know, it was a money well spent type of situation for us, just to get a learning lesson. 2 is, at some point, you're going to have friends who are also starting to submit SBIR proposals. Obviously, you make the decision on who is a trusted friend, but exchanging proposals to have your friends read it for you is also a great way to improve your proposal. So.
I'd also add that the university periodically has SBIR, STTR workshops. And as part of those workshops, sometimes you can show these, the people leading them what you're doing, and they can give you some informal feedback.
Yeah, I mentioned previously that we have an Ask Me Anything webinar coming up on the 18th. It seemed like there was, that event may be full just based on some of the comments I saw in the chat there, but those are recorded and posted. So we do walk through those solicitations, you know, specific to what's on the street right now, to talk about, you know, and just put more words into what we're looking for and why things are structured the way they are, and to talk about it maybe in a little bit more plain language as opposed to a, you know, legal solicitation document. And so do keep an eye out for that. The AFWERX website is a great resource. And do note, I think this is one of the things in the Q&A there, that there are 3 separate topics that you'll see for AFWERX. There's an STTR phase 1, there's an SBIR phase 1, but there's also an SBIR direct to phase 2 as well. So phase 1, like I said, it has a lot to do with customer discovery, and at the end, you're required to demonstrate that there is a market inside of the Air Force for your solution. And that's done through an MOU. And so that is a requirement. Having that MOU, that memorandum of understanding, is a requirement for moving to that direct to phase 2, but that is an option if you're to that point already.
Thank you. I received 2 questions from my colleagues at IPRA, and I'll just read them. Will my SBIR STTR application benefit from having an IP license agreement with UC Berkeley or any other university, is the first question. And the second is, can I get a letter of support from UC Berkeley's IP patent office? Excuse me, from intellectual property office.
I'll take that one. Let me first respond to the second question. Very simple. Yes, the answer is, Kate, I think even mentioned explicitly in her presentation, we are all the time providing letters of support, both for collaborative sponsored research, for IP license agreements, and also if you're going to do one of those SUFI agreements, a shared special user facility, we include all that in the letter. As to whether the license or the IP rights agreement helps, as Scott already mentioned, for STTRs, it is a requirement. But actually, I turn it over to Jared to say, what do you think? How much does it help for an SBIR?
Sure. So there are mandatory levels that that you have to meet for cost allocation for STTRs and SBIRs, frankly. So for SBIR, you can have a subcontractor up to 30% or 33%, excuse me. And then the small business has to do at least 50% of the work, okay? For STTR, right, there's a mandatory subcontractor. They have to do at least 30% of the work, right? That would be like a UC Berkeley, for instance. And the small business has to do at least 40% of the work. So there's a 30% trade space in there. That you can have the small business do, you can have the research institution, you can bring on another subcontractor if you'd like. In terms of the IP agreement, that as Mike mentioned, that is a requirement for STTR. There are templates out there that SBA comes up with that you can follow or not, right? Ultimately, we need to have one on file, right? We, the Air Force, are not going to adjudicate the contents of that IP agreement. We need to know that there's one in place. Right, and you need to show it to us just to satisfy that requirement. But we're not going to give you a hard time about the details inside of it, right? Ultimately, we want something that is beneficial to the small business, right? These programs are for, and derive mutual benefit for the small business and the research institution. So that's really what we're after. It has to be in place, but we don't dig into the details of it as long as you post signatories.
I'd add that, interesting, while it's required for an STTR, it's not necessarily required for an SBIR, but I think Jared and Scott mentioned how important an application is in terms of its commercial viability. And if you have an IP rights agreement or exclusive license with the university, that's going to make your company more commercially viable, so that's inherently going to help your application.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great point. I mean, ultimately, these programs have been around for 30 and 40 years, right? And they've all been structured the exact same way. Right, there was one sponsoring organization and there was one company, right, and they would do kind of a one-to-one match. The way this open topic is structured is that we want you to develop a community of stakeholders inside the Defense Department. We want more than one person to care, right, in other words. And so when we ask for commercialization potential, for you to demonstrate that, we want to see that people care in the commercial sector. When we ask for defense need, we want to see that people care in the defense sector, right? Ultimately, this open topic is really built around the fact that our problems are not unique, right? The things that I care about in my Air Force job, there's going to be other Air Force people who care as well. There's going to be Navy people, there's going to be Army people, there's going to be FAA and NASA people and DARPA folks, right? We're all doing a lot of the same thing. We want to take advantage of the collective attention, frankly, the collective funding, the collective resources and everything else that comes with it. So that really mitigates this transition risk that we see by diversifying that stakeholder base. We're a lot more likely to move forward, and you're more likely to have customers, right, that are interested in your product and your solution.
Can I add one thing also? And this goes back to the IP agreement. I think we have 2 different IP agreements that we're talking about also. So we have the IP agreement that's required for the STTR. We generally do what we call an allocation of IP rights, and that's talking about how we're going to manage intellectual property between the subcontractor and the small business during the term of that SBIR. And so my office, Industry Alliances office, we have templates, and we're happy to help get those in place quickly so that the applications can move forward. There's also a commercial license. So what that means is if there's intellectual property that's created in a Berkeley lab, and a small business wants to license that technology for use commercially, then you would work with Mike's office, the Office of Technology Licensing, to get a commercial license that could be on an exclusive or a non-exclusive basis. Mike can maybe talk a little bit more about that. And then that's something that also may make your application stronger in that you already do have IP rights to commercialize the technologies that are spinning out of Berkeley Labs.
Maybe the one other thing I could add is doing an IP rights agreement with the university is not it doesn't have to be a complex process. In fact, we have several flavors of IP rights agreements. There's the full license, which can be a 30-page document, kind of complex. But then on the other end of the continuum, there's what we call an IP rights letter agreement, which can just be 2 or 3 pages. It locks up your rights exclusively for maybe 6 to 12 months or in conjunction with the term of your SBIR or STTR grant or phase. And then in the middle, there's an IP rights option agreement, which is about 10 pages. So wherever you want to be in that continuum, we can quickly transact something with you to get your requirement fulfilled and move on.
Great, thanks, Mike. I think our next question we have up is for Joanne. What do you wish you'd known when you were first trying to get an SBIR contract?
What do I wish I'd known before I got my, before or when I was applying to?
I think when you're applying for it.
Well, I mean, the lesson is actually the same for me just in life. I was stressing out way too much. I was overthinking everything when the Air Force instructions was actually very clear. If you read the instruction and then you overthink it way too much, you're going to make it really difficult on yourself, which was exactly what I did the first time around. And I was like, why did they ask for this? And sometimes they would give out slide templates, and then sometimes they would ask for similar things across different slide templates, or just, you think they're asking for the same thing, but don't overthink everything. If they ask for a specific thing, just answer that question. And don't think about it way too much, and then just move on. And I think that's more of a me problem. I overthink everything and I overachieve on everything. And then the second time around when I applied, it was lot more like, okay, they asked for what they want explicitly. Just do that. That's what they want. You're gonna waste a lot more time doing those slides if you overthink it. And I think that's why the first time when I kind of explained my experience, I said a couple of times it's really easy, is because I thought it was very, very difficult and I overthought everything. So don't do what I did. So just follow your directions.
I think that's great life advice for us too, Joanne. Thank you. While we have you in the hot seat, a couple more questions have been coming through. One is just a quick one. Which SBIR did you apply to, the Air Force or Defense?
And I'm assuming when you say defense is DOD in general?
I would guess so, but I invite our audience member to clarify if we're wrong.
So I've only applied for the Air Force SBIR, and I have always followed Army and Navy. That's just not something that I've applied for so far. I lied, I also applied for one NIH, something like that. I have, beyond SBIR, I've always written like BAA, stuff like that. I've written other government proposals, but SBIR is only for the Air Force. Yes.
And also, could you tell us why you decided to apply for the STTR after the SBIR, please?
So I actually applied for them in parallel. So I didn't just abandon one and go to another. It all has to do with what you think you can gain out of a collaboration. Because when it comes to collaboration for a small company, right, to everything there's pros and cons. And so, you need to understand what you can offer and what you can take back from collaboration and where your boundaries are. So, STTR just offered an opportunity for us to bring a certain project that was at a certain maturity level to a partner in a way that we can articulate, this is what we can offer you, this is your expertise, and this is how the IP is going to be allocated. And so that kind of clarity, I want to emphasize too, having that clarity facilitated the negotiation with the university a lot. But there's no, we're not favoring one versus the other. It's really just, we have a project that could benefit from STTR. So, yeah.
Great, thanks, Joanne. This next one is for Jared. For the open topic for AFWERX, are there any good resources to learn about the types of things the Air Force is looking for, like the Air Force Office of Scientific Research, just kind of any general resources to look at?
Sure, no, so it's a really wonderful question. So the example I use is going to the grocery store. It's something that I think everybody can relate to. When you go to the grocery store, you have a list. You're thinking about what you want to eat that week, or you have projects you want to kind of get through. So those are some things that you want, right? When you get there, you see that chocolate milk is half off, and you see that your favorite snack bars are on sale, and you didn't even think about this whole new section that the store had, right? So there's also things that you didn't know that you wanted and made a list for, right? And so this open topic provides for both types of things. So one, it's an open topic, or even things that we didn't think we even knew we wanted, right, exist out there in your brains, in the university system, wherever, right? You can come and find us and say, hey, check out this thing. And we're like, wow, we didn't even know that existed, right? And we can pull you in that way. Also, there are ways that there are focus areas that we publish with each solicitation that are just general tech areas that we know we need help with, right? That we know we're looking for solutions. And those tech areas are backed by communities of users and stakeholders in the Defense Department, specifically in the Air Force. And so those focus areas are published on the AFWERX website. And historically, they had been in the solicitation documents themselves, but we're looking at publishing that separately. Anyways, like I said, those are backed by communities of interest inside of the Defense Department. And many times those focus areas go on to become pitch days. So we didn't really mention pitch days so much so far in the program, but you may have seen them in media or some of the AFWERX website or what have you. But those pitch days are sponsored by the communities of interest inside of the Air Force. And so many of them start with the focus area. They have too many companies that that are really excellent, and they really want to publicize the work that's going on in that field, and ultimately get their leadership involved and really make it a community event through a pitch day. So those, if you can kind of get a jump start on finding your customer base by being applicable to one of those focus areas, but that is by no means a requirement. That is just a way that you can leverage the system for your benefit.
Thank you. It looks like we have 2 final questions to address, so we'll make this a last call for questions. If you have any that you'd like us to answer, your time is valuable to us, so we want to make sure we maximize that. Please put it in the Q&A. This question is, how do completely defense-centered companies fare in the SBIR process? I would say
they're very successful. They don't have to, though.
Yeah, I would
me,
sorry.
Yeah, so I am a completely defense-centered company, but so I started with AFSOC, so SOCOM in general, and then Army. I do have commercial sales that came after the defense contracts. So, and that would be why I was qualified for SBIR, but I would say I considered it at an advantage because I was able to kind of understand the requirements pretty quickly and do my slide decks that way. I think I did okay.
Yeah, I mean, they, you know, defense-only companies can be very successful. You know, one of the 3 evaluation criteria is commercialization potential, right? So you can you know, really speak to that more directly when you have, if you have sales, but that's not an absolute requirement of the system. Later on in the process, we talked about the Strat 5 program. There's external investment, commercial investment is required to participate in that program. But you know, ultimately these programs are designed to be dual use. That is to say, they have the solutions have applicable markets in the commercial sector as well as the defense sector as well. And we want to leverage that collective funding to get you as far as possible in terms of development and commercialization of your product.
I would echo that. I mean, at NSIN, almost all of our programs that we run, the ones that Kaitie are participating in, almost all of them are focused on dual use ventures. So we think about that as a core thesis for our work at NSIN, because we just know that there is a great opportunity on the commercial side and the defense market for a lot of products. And so, but to the question, yeah, I mean, we see them all the time still, and I think that they do really well in that process. It's just, I know that for a lot of the programs, we're looking at mainly companies that we see in both, just because of where we're running our programs at universities and in other locations where naturally we're going to run into those dual use opportunities. But yeah, highly would encourage both. Even if you're just a defense company, still apply. If you have a commercial market already, we'd love to see you in there.
Great, thanks, Scott. And I think, you know, one final question to kind of build off of that for both Jared and Scott are, what are some strengths that you guys look for in proposals when evaluating them?
Yeah, I mean, so, you know, we're not allowed to look at things that aren't published, right? So we publish the evaluation criteria on purpose. And we are required to rate those areas specifically. And our supporting comments in terms of evaluation have to support those ratings, right? So it is a very structured process, and we try to mitigate, you know, bias and across evaluators and experience sets and so on and so forth. But you know, we're going to look at what we say we're going to look at, right? Is the short answer. That being said, I mean, you know, using clear language helps, right? Whether, you know, you want to speak directly to those kind of defense marketplace and use the, you know, try to jump into the acronym soup that is military jargon. You can try that through partners like Joanne was talking about, or you can just, you know, talk to us like normal people. Either one should work just fine. You know, we're interested in bringing in folks who don't think like us, right? That's important. Something like 60 to 70% of all open topic, of the thousands of open topic proposals and contracts were awarded to people who have never done business with us before. And that's one of the things that we really like about our program, is that we're trying to bring in things that, in people that aren't like us and don't necessarily speak like us, because we want to be better.
Yeah, funny enough, this is where a place where Jared and I share a lot of the same experience, because I've also been an evaluator on open topic in the past, including the joint open topic work that we did in the 20.1 cycle. And I would say that it's a really great process for scoring and evaluating, where the Air Force works really hard to eliminate bias. So somebody that scores your proposal is only looking at a subsection, right? Maybe only evaluating commercial potential or only evaluating technical merits. They actually don't get to evaluate all of the categories. And so it's really impressive to see behind the scenes all the work and effort the Air Force puts in place to make sure that bias is eliminated. I would say that the key part in all of this is make sure it's in your proposal, right? If something is super crucial and important, don't just put it in your website, because I can't sit there and evaluate that if it's not in your proposal. So I would say that any of the work that you've done in the past, you're trying to engage the Defense Department or your customer in this particular case, is super useful to include for somebody who's trying to score the commercialization potential. So make sure that if you have sales records or things that's applicable to how you've perceived the commercial market, like make sure to include that in your proposal, because that is going to be the only opportunity somebody has to evaluate your proposal. You know, even if you meet like a Joanne on the street and have a great conversation with her, I can't bring that into the proposal process. I can only review what's in front of me. And so that's one place where it's really key to make sure that those ideas are down in your white paper, in your slide deck, or however you're responding to that proposal, because that's the only information that can be evaluated.
Great, thanks, Scott. I just wanted to ask panelists, any saved rounds before we close out for the day? Great, well, thank you so much to our panelists. We really appreciate it. I'm also just dropping my email into the chat box in case anyone has questions or they want to be connected to any of the panelists. I can try to make that happen. And then I'll just pass it over to Laura.
So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It's really been a bi-coastal endeavor, and I wanted to thank both Scott and Jared for joining us from the East Coast, Joanne for being our guest entrepreneur, elaborating on her experience with us, and my colleagues at AFWERX, Kate and Mike, and Kaitie as well for hosting this panel along with us. It's been a pleasure to talk with you all more about this process and to welcome you into our entrepreneurial ecosystem. Thank you so much. Go Bears, and best of luck.